Alright guys, here we go. This is the first set of lecture notes for the new year, and if you'll notice, some things are kind of different with the way it's going to go this time around. The first is that you now get to see this lovely face along with the lovely voice you've been hearing all year, which I'm sure all of you have been dying to do, and I'm being completely sarcastic when I say that. Also, I'm going to do this series a little bit differently than before. It's not going to be the actual PowerPoints. I'm going to try to keep the topic shorter than the time it takes me to get to work. So we're looking at 10 to 12 minutes per topic. Now, from your point of view, that's a good thing because you don't have to see this mug or listen to this voice for a long period of time. From my point of view, it's a little bit more difficult because I can't get in depth into things as I'd want to. So this is going to be like a quick hit list of the things that we're going to talk about in class that we're going to get more in depth on in class. So, leading it off, the first thing we're going to talk about is Reconstruction, or more specifically, what the crap are we going to do with the South after the Civil War? There's a couple of things we're going to deal with as we go. Number one, some of the plans that were proposed on how to get the South back into the Union, and we're also going to deal with some of the challenges that were faced by recently freed slaves after the war. So, along with trying to get the South politically reintegrated back into the Union with all the difficulties that that's going to face, we've also got to concern ourselves with rebuilding the South. Because, as you can see from a couple of these pictures right here, in a lot of places in the South, it's been completely devastated because the majority of the battles were fought there. So, you're dealing with things like you've got crops that have been ruined, you've got infrastructure, railroads, roads that have been destroyed with the bombing and the battles and things like that. And also, as a matter of strategy from the northern perspective, and also, you've got cities that have been ruined, burned, or bombed during the course of the war as well. So when you combine that with the political aspects of getting them back into the Union, along with the problems having to do with integrating ex-slaves into society, there's a lot of things that are going to be going on during this time period. So before we even get to the plans for Reconstruction and how we're going to do it, let's take a second and look at some of the difficulties that newly freed blacks were facing when they're in the South. And the best way to do this is put yourself in their shoes. Think about this. You're kind of thrown into society. You have no training, you have no education, you have no opportunity. So it's an incredibly difficult situation. The best way I could just line it up for you is to be like if your parents kicked you out tomorrow and said, go make it on your own, all right? Without having any skills to be able to do things like get a job or buy a car or rent an apartment or even set up an electric bill or things like that. That's kind of the parallel to some of the things that these guys were dealing with. So, as a way to help ex-slaves become more easily assimilated into society, the government sets up something called the Freedmen's Bureau, which has a couple of goals as it went. Number one, it was to provide food, clothing, and medicine to ex-slaves as they began to experience freedom. And that's simply because they really didn't have any access or any way to be able to get these things on their own. Number two, and most importantly, was the literacy component to it, and the fact that one of the main goals was to teach ex-slaves how to read, to hopefully get them into society, get them to have some kind of economic advantage. And to be honest with you, this was probably the only successful component of the plan. The Freedmen's Bureau overall wasn't very effective, except when it came to the literacy component of it, and the fact that it taught 200,000 ex-slaves how to read. So it was very successful on that front, but overall didn't really accomplish anything that it set out to do. Now, a lot of people in the South at this time felt a lot of threats coming from this newly freed slave population, and it came in different kind of forms. It was economic, it was political, it was social, it was anything that you could think. So, in an effort to, I guess you could say, keep the status quo or keep things the way they were, a lot of states instituted what were called black codes. Now, these things were they basically replaced the slave codes in the southern states, and they also put restrictions on the newly freed blacks. And like I said, as a way to kind of keep them submissive, to keep them from gaining power, be it political, economic, or social. A couple of things that they did. Uh, they were unable to serve on juries. They were unable to buy land, and they were also not allowed to have interracial marriages. So, just to kind of sum it up, there were ways to keep things the way they were before the war. All right, so now we're actually going to talk about the plans for Reconstruction, and there's two main ones we need to concern ourselves with. They're presidential Reconstruction and congressional Reconstruction. And the differences between these two really boil down to the philosophies of the two groups proposing them on how they felt that the South started the war, the reasons for, and all those things. So the first is presidential Reconstruction, which was proposed and initiated by Abraham Lincoln before he was assassinated, and then Andrew Johnson once he took power. Now, from the views of the people on the other side, they felt that presidential Reconstruction was way too lenient. And the reason that the terms might not seem that harsh is because both Lincoln and Johnson felt that the Civil War started due to a rebellion by individuals, not the actual entire population. So they didn't see a need to punish the entire South for the actions of a few individuals in getting this quote unquote rebellion started. So looking more specifically at presidential reconstruction, or as you may see it referred to from time to time, executive reconstruction, what we're going to start with, and the main point of it is what's called Lincoln's 10% plan that he comes out with in December 1863. And basically all he says is that for the South, for the southern states to come back into the Union, number one, 10% of the number of voters in 1860 need to sign loyalty oaths, which says they're loyal to the Union. Then the state can form a new government and apply for readmission to the country. It also, and this angered people on the other side as well, pardoned most former Confederates because, once again, he didn't feel like it was the fault of the people in the South that this war happened. It was the fault of a few leaders of the rebellion. Now, after Lincoln is assassinated and Andrew Johnson comes to power as president, Congress thinks that he's going to make these terms a little bit more harsh. But basically, what he does is just kind of continues on with what Lincoln proposed and added just a couple more components. The main one of which is that the South's debt would be forgiven. So, kind of along the same lines, but just adding a couple of components. All right, so we move from there to congressional reconstruction. Now, you're going to see congressional reconstruction referred to as this or radical reconstruction. And the reason it's called radical reconstruction is because it was proposed by a group of people in Congress who were known as radical Republicans. Now, here's the deal on this. The radical Republicans felt that Lincoln and Johnson were nowhere near as punitive or near as harsh on the South as they should have been. In their eyes, they felt like Lincoln and Johnson had just given them a slap on the wrist for causing this war. In their eyes, they felt the South should be punished, that they rebelled against, they should be treated as a place that rebelled against the nation, and it should be incredibly difficult, and they should have to jump through hoops to be able to be readmitted to the Union. So they're going to come up with a plan that's goes a lot further than what Lincoln or Johnson, either one, proposed. So the first response we're going to look at to presidential reconstruction is the Davisville, which came out as a response to Lincoln's 10% plan. Now, it built on the components that Lincoln proposed and made them a little bit or a lot more harsh than what he wanted. Instead of the 10% of people in the South who would have to, or in a state in the South that would have to sign a loyalty oath for consideration to be moved back into the Union, they said that more than 50% of voters had to sign a loyalty oath. They also said that you had to take another one on top of that to be able to vote. They also said that the states needed to come up with a new constitution and in it formally repeal secession or to, basically apologize for it, and also abolish slavery. So it had to be in stone that they were going to do these things before they could even be considered to be back into the Union. Well, Lincoln, in his philosophy feels like it goes a little too far in that it shouldn't be this harsh, so he does what's called a pocket veto, which means he doesn't even consider it, and it basically just dies at his death. All right, guys, so if I'm going to wrap this thing up in a couple of minutes and make it around 10 like I told you I would, I'm going to briefly hit on some of the major amendments of this era, and then we're going to wrap it up for the day. The first one, though it's not on the screen, is the 13th Amendment, which basically outlaws slavery. Okay, so we move from there to the 14th Amendment, which basically all it did, you need to think about citizenship and equal rights when you hear the 14th Amendment. And what it did is it formally legalized components of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. It did a couple of things along with the citizenship and equal rights. And one of the big ones says, and this is mainly pointing towards the South, it said if a state denies the right to vote or suffrage to freed blacks, it's going to lose a portion of its reps in Congress. Now, once these components come out, it's not a perfect bill. There were a couple of criticisms that came out because of it. And the first one was that it didn't specifically say that blacks had the right to vote. It was just assumed because the amendment said equal rights that voting would come along with that. So there's nothing concrete there that says southern states have to give blacks the right to vote. Also, it did not say anything about it did not say anything about equal rights for women. So everything from the standpoint of the bill, from the point of view of the people who were criticizing it, was that everything it said only applied to males, and that needed to be remedied. So the criticisms of the 14th Amendment are addressed with the 15th Amendment in 1870, which basically took care of these fears of voting not being legal. And basically what it says is it's a guarantee of black suffrage. It's a guarantee that blacks will be able to vote. Now, like a lot of things we talk about, it's not perfect because there were a couple of loopholes in it. And the fact that it did not specifically say that Southerners could not restrict the right to vote from free blacks. So as a result of this, the South found these loopholes and began to institute or put into place things like poll taxes, literacy tests, and other things that we'll talk about going forward. All right, guys, that wraps up the Reconstruction, and it looks like I came in right under 10 minutes, so I kept my word on this, and I'll try to do it going forward. Next time, we will talk about industrial America and all that good kind of stuff as we move forward. anything you need, anybody who's not a part of my class, you can always go to the website, www.connorland.weebly.com. It'll be linked on this video. And other than that, appreciate you watching, appreciate you working. We'll see you next time.